I've made some videos talking about nunchi and implicit communication in Japanese and Korean culture, and a lot of people found the videos interesting, but I got a few comments from people saying, why do they leave out stuff and why can't they just communicate more clearly? The thing that these commenters don't understand is that what they think of as leaving out crucial information to most Japanese and Korean people is just leaving out things that are totally obvious to them, and they don't think that they're leaving stuff out that is necessary to be understood. An analogy I would make is imagine if you were talking to someone, you just said, "Hey, why don't we meet for coffee tomorrow morning?" And they were confused because they weren't sure if you wanted to meet at 3 a.m. when they're still asleep or 10 a.m. after they're awake. And so then you had to explain all the time, let's meet for coffee tomorrow morning after the sun comes up. That's the way it feels, I think, to people from high context cultures talking to someone who is a more low context communicator, that it's not that you're purposefully leaving out information, it's that you're just leaving out stuff that you think anyone would know. It's kind of obvious. This is not to say that Japanese or Koreans always understand what the other person says, and especially in Japan, it can get a little bit extreme. But I would say the vast majority of the time, people do understand. For example, Japanese are kind of famous for saying no without saying no explicitly. But it's not as though the other person is confused about it. Every time someone does this, it's very clear to both parties that they're saying no, and they're just saying it in a way that is polite by Japanese standards. It's only a foreigner who might not realize that they're saying no without saying so explicitly. So this is not just a way of avoiding being impolite. In a lot of situations, it just has to do with like everyday logistics. I think I gave an example of that in another video. For example, if my mom asked me to do something for her, she can just ask me to do the thing itself, and I fill in the details of why does she want this, how do I need to do it, how quickly does it have to happen, and so on. Based on information I actually already know. I don't have to do amazing mind reading. I already know enough information to figure it out. But the thing that I've noticed about Americans in general is that they do not have the habit of doing that little extra thinking when you ask them to do something. So it's not like I'm explicitly trying to leave out information. It's just stuff that seems totally obvious that you can think, if you just think for a few extra seconds or even a second, you could figure it out from the information you do know. But it's a question of habit. Japanese people and people who grow up in these high context cultures just have a habit of always thinking a little bit more. If someone says something to them, they think for a minute, like, why would they say this? What's their situation? And so on. It doesn't take like huge amounts of effort. It's pretty obvious, right? But if you don't have that habit of making that little extra second or so of thinking, then you might think, oh, why didn't they clarify what they meant? Why did they leave out these details or something? So sometimes people say, it seems like so much work to think about all these extra things. But imagine the extra work and annoyance if every time you ask someone to coffee, you had to specify it's going to be in the morning, only if you have time, etc., etc. You have to add in all these extra things that seem obvious to most people. That's the feeling you get when you're in a culture where people need all this extra detail spelled out for them. It just feels like a lot of extra work for you to communicate things that seem like they're just everyday obvious things.